Welcome to the Premium Mindset, the weekly podcast where homegrown entrepreneurs and business owners, Evan Ritchey and Cameron Bawden, share the good, the bad, and the ugly of modern entrepreneurship and reveal what really happens behind the scenes of their personal and professional lives. As owners of two of America's fastest growing and most disruptive companies, Coconut Cleaning and Green Mango Pest Control, stay tuned for real stories, struggles, insight, and advice from real entrepreneurs in real time.
What's going on, everyone? I am excited to talk about today's topic, which is bad apples in business. And to do that, we first want to discuss the origin of the term bad apple, which very simply came from the idea that when you put a bowl of fruit together, and specifically a bowl of apples, if there is one rotten apple, it will
Does it
quickly...
not work for bananas?
Well, it works for all fruit.
Okay, go ahead.
It works in business partners and fruit, you name it. But if you put
business, you almost slid that in, man. That was good.
If you put an assortment of any type of fruit together, if there is one bad fruit, it will quickly infect the rest of the bowl. And so we're going to talk about how that principle is applied into business, because everybody knows that they work with somebody that could be deemed as a bad apple or a cancer to the company. And we're going to dive in deep on how we as business owners address that topic. And first, when I was thinking about this, I really wanted to go a little bit farther and think about, okay, what for me is a bad apple? And the first and foremost, is, are they coachable? Because when problems are identified and people are resistant to coaching, that is one of the first red flags for me when working with someone new. If they come into the business...
How do you see that they're coachable or not coachable? Is it body language? Is it the questions that they ask? What are those signs for you?
I feel like it's a combination of those things. A lot of it body language, because if they're saying the things that they think you want them to hear, but they're one hand on the doorstep as they're getting the feedback, like cool, like whatever. But right. I feel like where I see people being non-coachable the most is comprehending what you're saying, repeating it back, and then doing the opposite in their actions. And so it's almost like, am I dumb? Like, I feel like I very clearly explained what the expectations are. But they give the lip service when they're there in front of you, but when they go actually back out to action, they don't execute. And to me, that's one of the biggest signs of not being coachable, is if they're showing comprehension and they're not doing it. To me, that's like total going outside the lines of, hey, I know what you want me to do, I just don't think it's best, so I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
And so there, and then also in terms of not being coachable, another thing that I would say is, maybe a bad apple is a gossiper, somebody who spreads drama, looks for drama, or they talk about their teammates. And so those are a few ways in which I've identified, hey, these are my parameters for when I deem someone as a bad apple. It's not being coachable. It's being a gossiper, not seeking understanding, and thinking that they know everything. Those are my big, 4 things.
Yeah, I love that.
But when it comes to bad apples, what do you think of, Cameron, as it pertains to that principle? Because you've had a lot of time in business working with bad apples, also being one yourself. What would you say your principle is what you think of when you think of that?
You're sly today, man. That we were joking before we started about how a lot of times it's not even your coworkers that are bad apples. It's the leader or the owner.
Yeah.
That's the bad apple. And I think the lazy way of being a manager or an owner is by just quickly going in there and stating, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, you misunderstood this, you're gone. Because he could, like you said, and that's why I kind of laughed when you said, I gave him my expectations and he didn't understand them. Well, is that on you or is that on him for not clarifying and asking all those questions? And I've certainly made a ton of mistakes by going in and just assuming that they know or had the expectation that I had on them. And that's why, there's so many different stories out there, but because I love aviation, I love the story about this fighter pilot who was doing an air show one day. And shortly after he took off, he talks about how he had this thought in his mind of, hey, I hope the mechanic that, fueled my plane today, he was flying a piston aircraft. He said, I hope he didn't put Jet A fuel in here. I didn't check. And normally it's pilot's responsibility, not responsibility, but you just double check those things. Like after the fueler fuels up your helicopter or airplane, like you're supposed to go over there and make sure the cap's on there.
Yeah.
Shortly after he has this thought, the engines die out. And luckily he was able to walk away from the crash, but completely totaled the airplane. The first thing he did is he goes over to the fuel and tests it. And sure enough, there was Jet A fuel in what should have been 100 low lead. A lot of people would have thought he would have went over there and reamed that mechanic out, right? Just chewed him out. He just made him crash a multi-million-dollar airplane. There's people in the show. He could have killed people if the airplane landed on the spectators. He could have killed him. And instead, he sat down with him and just, hey, do you understand what just happened? And just calmly walked through it and just said, are you ever going to make this mistake again? And the mechanic says, I'll never make this mistake again. He said, good, you'll be the last guy that touches my airplane every single time, because I don't want to go up the next day wondering if the mechanic that just, laid his hands on my airplane has learned the experience yet to double check what fuel they're putting in the plane. And I just think that's profound. And it was a great lesson for me. It was an awakening for me, because that's not how I've always been. I've been that bad apple that just came in, guns blazing. Hey, you're wrong. I'm right. You're done. See you later. And you just can't do that.
I think you're right. You pay for it long term. I love that story. I feel like I've heard a few other stories that are very similar to it. And I love how this evolution for you being an entrepreneur has been one of learning from not only your mistakes, but also you've seen now long enough to know the true benefit of keeping someone who's made a mistake, that shows recollection of it, and they adhere to what they did and they understand the ramifications. You did this recently in a meeting last week, and you texted me right before. You said, hey, obviously don't want to ring this guy out, but I want people to understand what he just said and the true cost of what that one inaction was and how much it cost the company. I said, go for it.
So did I go about it okay, or did I dig into it deeper?
You did a phenomenal job. Actually, Sabina even commented that you did a phenomenal job. But what I loved about
Sabina commented?
Sabina, she said you did a good job. You have her stamp of approval. But I love how you went about it. So a little context is that an employee pulled a reporting for doing a certain number of customers to get serviced, and they left out 1,200 customers.
Yeah, for the past 5 months.
Yes. So that meant hundreds of thousands of dollars for Green Mango. And that person not only found it, but they proactively came to us and said,
he could have slid it under the rug so easily, which is what I thought was so cool. Sorry, keep going.
No, yeah. So they could have either just put the 1,200 customers back in and never said anything, but he said, hey guys, I want you to understand, I found this is what happened, and I will never let it happen again. And right when he said that, I almost I wanted to call you and be like, Cameron, hold on. But you addressed it so well. And I think that hasn't come from just an innate ability to see that someone has messed up and you just being all patient. It has come from you walking into a room where you're under the impression someone acted a certain way, and you're just like, look, we don't tolerate that. You're gone. And now we've seen enough where people are like, hey, well, my side of the story is this. And then also those people contribute to the solutions long term. Like that pilot and the mechanic, he now has a team member that he can trust entirely to. Now that guy's probably going to make a checklist, a double checklist, to make sure that everything's operating efficiently. And I feel like the few managers that I can run through in my head where you've actually exercised this with, myself included, have been giving you the highest ROI on their input, because you exercise patience at a time where they probably were like, hey, I'm fired, right?
Yeah, it's just so hard. At least it is for me to not. And that's why the path of least resistance is just going in and reaming them out. Being patient, controlling your emotions, and figuring out a different way to where everyone can benefit. I'm far from perfect on it, but I'm working on it, because I can see now that, I don't know. It's just crazy. We'll see. It's still new enough for me that I understand the principle, but not 100% bought in. But I can see that the times I have done it, it has made a big difference.
Let's talk about a time where I've been able to learn from that lesson from you and apply it. This is, to me, a true underdog story. I had someone come from another competing carpet cleaning business, and right out the gate, where I felt like I was the bad apple is that he immediately was like looking at our operations. He's like, dude, like this company I came from is a north of $100 million company. You need to do this, this. And I was just like, we got it. Like, just do your job. And so I right out the gate, as I've internalized this story, found out that I was the bad apple in a lot of ways. However, after a year or two of not really listening to this person, he was very proactively anti me and anti the operations of Coconut, but he was the best cleaner. And so it was hard to find this balance where I'm
Really?
like,
I didn't know that.
yeah, like he did not care for me.
Damn.
And he didn't really care for how we did things, but like he was so adamant about like, regardless, if I'm showing up to someone's house, I'm going to do a good job.
I love that.
And it came to this point where his performance was so low where I just said, hey, look,
Performance and upsells, because you're saying the cleaning is great.
the
But
cleaning was phenomenal. And a lot of his frustration was for how we upsold.
Okay.
Like, hey, like this is how it should be done. So we had a good heart to heart earlier this year in January. I said, if you don't turn around and change your performance, you'll be fired. And he's a father, and that's always been a sensitive, demographic of people is that our parents
hard.
and it's hard to think of letting someone go. And he said, okay, I'll get better, but I need you to listen on this, this, and this. And I was like, okay, we'll look into it. I reported back on, making some of the changes that he recommended. And now that we are 11, 12 months in, he is the top performer at Coconut, making the most money, and he has provided the most contribution for our systems and operations to allow other people to make the most money. And so it was a true heart to heart of two bad apples. I thought I was a fresh apple, realizing that we had a lot of errors in our behavior, and we both decided to make a decision to learn from one another and hold each other accountable. And Coconut is now better because of the implementations I've done from his recommendation. And he's now better because of our little heart to heart of like, regardless of how you feel about me, you need to show up and perform.
So let's pull this together, because if I'm a listener listening to this podcast, it's like, don't be the bad apple, but get rid of the bad apple. So how do you know when to get rid of them?
I believe unless you start addressing things head on, you'll never be able to identify bad apples or not.
Is that little things? Is that big things? Is there a threshold?
Everything.
You're talking a week where they don't hit their upsell numbers, you're bringing them in. Is that one day that they don't hit it? Is that one week?
And I can see how that could be a little tricky, but here, what I would say is that if the demeanor changes.
What do you mean?
Like if you have a good system in play, those people know that I'm going to go to you if I start slipping in my performance. Mm-hmm. But when I see someone who normally is providing, a happy culture, or they work really hard and they start showing up and they're sluggish in their chair, they're texting during a meeting, I'm like...
And you've talked to them a couple times.
But like immediately I address it, where I say, hey, Mark, I love you. You seem off. Are you okay?
What's up? Yeah.
But to answer your question, the reason you address everything, both recognizing positive and negative, is it allows you to accelerate the identification process for someone turning into a bad apple, because they might say, yeah, my paycheck was short and I feel like I was slighted $300. It's like, okay, cool. Let me address something that happened 2 days ago, rather than letting that happen for 6 months. And they're like, you owe me big.
I think that's huge, because we've lost a lot of people from them not voicing their concerns. And here they are, they're trying to be patient on their end and be a team player. But like, if you're shorted even $100, $50, that bothers anyone. I don't care who you are. So if you're someone that's working for someone else, like, speak up. Employers appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think I can speak for you. But also, if you're an employer, encourage your people to speak up to you when they're frustrated, because you can't read people's minds. And I think your zone of excellence is being able to read people. You can come into a room and you'll be like, what's up? I'm like, I'm trying to hide this. How does he know what's going on? And you have that ability, and you need that person in your organization. If you know that you're not that type of person that can read body languages, like, I don't think I'm that great at it, but you're phenomenal at it. You need someone in your corner that can help you as an owner to point out, hey, this person's struggling. They need help.
Thank you. What I'd also say that you need someone in your corner is someone who has the ability to drive standards, but also look internally first. And that to me has always been you, because I always joke that, money means the most to you in terms of like the business, not like your family and, the spiritual side. But when you show up, like money is like, that's the motivator.
Yeah.
But for someone like you who has identified a perceived area of weakness as far as interactions with others, you've invested more than anyone I know, spending your money on bettering yourself in areas of weakness.
Yeah.
And I feel like the biggest accelerator and the thing that could supplement the idea of a bad apple in a business is starting first with yourself as a leader. And you've been able to do that. So anytime I've had a hang up with you or a frustration with you, it's easy for me to not even drop it, but voice it with you, because I know that you'll either explain further to it or you'll privately go start working on it yourself. And so when it comes to bad apples, I think it's important that you start first as the leader, especially if you have an organization that's already going. But what was...
Well, I was going to say my one story about Mark. That was the first task that he gave me outside of talking about the life balance wheel is, hey, can I go talk to some of your 5 closest people and really like ask them what you suck at?
And you don't get to know who it was, right?
No, but I mean, you kind of know, because it's like, hey, give me a friend that you hang out with, give me a business partner, give me this guy. So you kind of have your categories. But, I love what James said. My buddy, one of my best friends, James McCabe, his feedback was when, in sports, I get so competitive and you like, just don't mess with me. Like, I want to win. I will do anything it takes to win. James said, when I'm playing ball with Cameron, if it's a foul or if it's out, it's almost not worth arguing with him, because he will not lose that argument, because he's so certain that it was out on you or out. I was just like, dude, what? How horrible is that? Like, I hated that. But I had to be open to receiving that feedback. And a lot of people, you have to have an ego as a business owner. Like, you have to have that confidence. You have to have, some big shoulders in order to run a business. But you also have to be open to some of your closest friends, and be careful who you take that advice from. But you got to be open to that feedback, because those are the people that see things at a different level. Mickey's given me so much great insight. You've given me great insight. My dad came in the other day, and he doesn't come in very often, but he came in and he gave me great insight from a different perspective. And if I'm just so, ego driven that I can't hear it, I'm never going to progress. And if my point here in business is to make money, and if I'm nice to people, or if I do something, however that person's asking me to change, makes me more money, why don't I want to do that? Like, do I want to be right or what? Like, what's my point here?
Right. What would you say to the business leader that references to you like, I just work with a bunch of idiots, like everyone I work with is dumb? Is it, because I know what I would say, but like, what would you say to that guy? Because I feel like we've heard that from a few people that we work with, but also like other business owners where they're like, the people I work with are just trash. It's like,
and they're in charge of that trash.
Yes.
Like, they're the owner.
Yes.
Well, it goes back to our last podcast about pay. So why don't you pay you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
In anything in life. You go to a nice, expensive restaurant, like, you're going to get a nice steak. You pay for an expensive hotel room or a cheap hotel room, you're going to get a cheap or a nice hotel room. It's just what it is. If you pay the bottom tier, or if you're working with idiots, it's because you're paying idiot prices. So it's your fault, man.
Yep.
Like, it always comes back to you. You're going to have to take it on the chin.
Always. And whether it's you, and let's say that you're performing at optimal levels, it's then your responsibility to have a system where your leaders feel supported in creating their own decisions to remove bad apples as well. Because nothing kills me more when like Cole comes to me and I'm like, dude, like that person sounds like a nightmare for you. Like, why haven't you let him go? He's like, do you want me to let him go?
If you've trained, if you've done all the write-ups, if you've had, there's nothing that frustrates me more and makes me, because we're talking about families. A lot of people that work here have families, they have kids. It's a big decision to let someone go. I want to be able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I've literally given that person every opportunity to rise to the occasion. Because they didn't, it's on them. It's not on me. And the first few years, I haven't been able to, a lot of times I wasn't able to say that.
I like what you said to one of our leaders the other day who said, hey, this person's just not performing right. You said, no problem. One, do they know they're not performing right?
Right.
Like, are you vocalizing that? But
And
two,
they
if
said
I were
no.
to call them, do they think like everything's going fine? And even if they had a suspicion that they don't think everything's going fine, do they know what's going on? Have they had a performance improvement plan? Are they under the impression that, you know, everything they're doing is just top notch? Because there's so much of an echo chamber when it comes to bad apples, but also good culture. And that is, one, always making sure that you're doing the best that you can as the leader, so it's a good vacuum chamber. But also, two, is once you get to a certain size, you have to let your leaders know that like they have to make those decisions without your constant overseeing them.
Well, that's why I love that Kathleen has pushed us this year to do write-ups.
Yeah.
We were horrible at it. I've never done a write-up. So I can't sit here and preach, but you've taken that on. You've done a lot of write-ups. Our managers have started to do a lot of write-ups. I know they're uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable for me, but when you write it up, it forces you to have that direct conversation, because before, what we were doing, people don't like conflict.
Yeah.
So it would be like, hey, Evan, I need you to, and they just kind of beat around the bush, and that person's not understanding what they're saying. Like in a write-up, it's, hey, I'm not happy with you doing this, this, and that. And there's no gray area of what you're frustrated with.
Right. I feel like I've referred to in a few of my write-ups as this is a diagnostics check. That a lot of people feel like they're not operating at full capacity, sometimes by their own inaction or wrong actions. And I feel like when you say, hey, this is pretty much a diagnostics check on what's going on, and the perceived problem right now is, one, your tardiness.
Yeah.
So we need to document that I'm aware of the problem and that you're aware of the problem,
that.
and this is a plan of action that we're going to take to improve.
Look at you, man. Get rid of those bad apples.
Fast.